Okay. Hi, Lynn. We already said hi, but hello again. So last time we got up to about UCL years and the book that you were writing with John. And something I wanted to start with is you said something about teas that you had, because we had talked about your tea time in Montreal with Heb, and you were going to tell me about some tea times at UCL that were even more
Oh,
daunting. But
I can't remember why I thought that was important, but actually we did, John and I did, this is London, so we went for tea every day. This is British life. So at
yeah,
3 or 4 in the afternoon, you go for tea,
right.
basically. And we had two different habits, you might say. One of them was to go to the kind of universe UCL tea room, which was a big room with a big old lady with a monstrously large teapot pouring tea for really,
That's a good
really
image.
funny. It's quite an image, actually. Really great. So that was one thing. That was the typical thing, and then that would involve walking through parts of UCL past. Have you been to UCL? Do you know
I
UCL?
have, yeah,
You
yeah.
know where Jeremy Bentham is? That kind of thing with his bot, whatever in the whatever.
Yes,
So
I think I think so. Yes.
we would walk from anatomy through that area, past Jeremy Bentham, into the tea room every day, and so that was a
All right.
habit. But the other habit was we would have tea regularly with the anatomy and physiology faculty in a room in so anatomy and physiology were both in the same building in on
Okay.
Gower, right? I don't know if you know the way the
Mm-hmm,
UCL
mm-hmm.
Gower Street is, all that stuff facing on Gower Street. That's where the medical school is. On the other side is the hospital. On one side, on the east side of Gower is the university. On the west side of Gower is the hospital,
Right.
or aspects of the hospital. And so the anatomy and physiology shared one of the buildings on right on Gower Street, and they held joint tea in a kind of a big seminar room, the old style seminar rooms with lots of books, like a lot. You remember what books with libraries,
Oh yeah, I still have a lot of books actually.
stuff
So
like that. I do too, but like, what am I
yeah.
going to do? Anyway, it's a real issue because I've already gotten rid of half of my books, and I still have
Yeah,
more.
it's an issue for me too because I live in Europe and
Serious.
half my books are still in States and yeah.
So we went to this tea with physiology and anatomy, and physiology at that point was populated by three Nobel Prize winners: Ricardo Milady, Bernard Katz Milady, and Huxley, Andrew Huxley. I think it was Andrew Huxley. Um, and they sat around and held court in tea every afternoon. So here
Wow.
was here was me and John, a couple of brash Americans, sitting around this table, and there are these three distinguished, properly dressed, which I never was, the properly dressed British Prize winners sitting around holding court or talking about one thing or another. And that was really transformative, actually, in an interesting way. I mean, being in that kind of company, it was a. I mean, my career has been extremely lucky. So in that sense, that at McGill, I was surrounded by people like that,
Yes.
more or less
Yes.
high end. I was, and then luckily, I mean, in London, it was the same thing. I mean, there were just people whose levels of achievement were such as to create let's say, an aspirational goal. I mean, it was, John and I were dealing with the best, and there were no limits on what we thought we could do because
And
we were sitting
were
amongst
you
people.
writing the book during this time already or
Yeah, this is
yeah.
when we were writing the book. This is during the time we were writing the book. We were constantly interacting with those kinds of people, and I think must have had some sort of an effect. And it was
I'm
all
sure.
around tea, which is kind of strange.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Well, I
that's
mean, for me
that's
it's very
so I don't know why
fascinating
I
to
thought that was
imagine.
important, but it's a very, and I still to this day order extra strong Marks and Spencer tea online. I still drink
From
tea
that
that I
time
drank in
period.
London. Yeah, I got addicted to it, and I drink it. I have Marks and Spencer extra strong every day. Still, 50 years
Oh,
later.
wow. That's really great. Did you ask them about did you talk to them about anything that you were writing about at that
No,
time?
I don't know if John did. I did not have substantive interactions with a number of them. I did with one other person in physiology who shared my name, interestingly enough, a woman, a
Oh,
physiologist who did some really interesting work. Lynn Bindman was her name. So I kind of interacted with her a little bit, but I didn't talk with, I mean, yes, I was inspired by these people to some level, but the other side of it was these were your average, these guys were your typical British, pompous British academic. I mean, they were, that was the other message. Science is one thing, personality and kind of politics and stuff is character or another thing. So I learned that lesson too.
Yeah.
That
Did
big
you
deal
also get
kind
the
of thing.
feeling that it's not as far away, out of reach as you might have thought? I mean, I remember at a young age being around famous people or people who are really well accomplished, and it
Yeah.
gives you a kind of sense of, oh, they're human and it's possible.
Absolutely. That's the point. That's kind of the point I'm trying to make. It's all they put their pants on one leg at a time, just like me,
Yeah,
basically.
exactly.
Anything's possible. If they could do what they did, I sure as hell can. And I'm sure
Yeah.
John felt the same.
Especially when you're
And he
young
did.
and you have all that energy still. It's like, oh,
Right.
I can do this.
Right. Yeah. So
Yeah.
our attitude in when we were writing the book, and you actually said it in your email, we actually were very consciously aware, maybe delusionally at the time, but we were consciously aware because we talked about it, that that the theory that we were putting together at that time could serve as a fulcrum for organizing the way cognitive science deals with the brain going forward. We were very aware of that at the time, that we were trying to we were picking out sort of the most popular brain structure. And we thought if we could put forward a meaningful theory of that structure that was based on multiple levels of evidence, anatomy, physiology, behavior, all of these things in sync to the best extent possible,
Mm-hmm.
that could be a model for how to think about talking about brain and cognition, essentially. And that it could be the fulcrum because the hippocampus was so central that if we could unlock that piece, we might actually create the beginning of how you could. That was we had conversations exactly like that
Oh, well.
at at that time.
Yeah, I did say that in the email because to me, from my perspective, having come a bit later and studied it, it seems like the thing that, I mean, of course, the story I'm telling starts in a way with that time period. I mean, you
Yeah.
guys being in that environment of McGill that we talked about before, but then it sort of coming together in that book and as the fulcrum, or almost like everything kind of getting channeled into that. And then almost everything that I see now kind of seems relative to that. And I don't mean word for word exactly what the book says, but
No,
overall, the framework, everyone just uses it, right?
exactly right. I think that's the truth of it. And I think we thought we might be doing that at the time, but we also had conversations along the lines of when we publish this thing, it could just sink like a lead balloon.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, we were conscious of the fact that it could just many
Yeah.
things do. I'm not sure if I told you this book that I recently published with Richard Lane that on the neurobiology of psychotherapy, kind of very interesting stuff, basically
Oh,
on so trying to
that's
understand what's going
interesting.
on in the brain during therapy. I can tell you more about that some other time.
Yeah. I know you
We work
taught some classes on that, but
and I've published on that, and I actually I've done a fair amount of anyway.
mhm.
That book got published like the week that COVID started,
Oh no.
and the book just sank like a stone. I mean, it's had virtually no pickup
Oh
whatsoever.
gosh. Well,
Anyway, we thought that could happen with this. I mean, we had two opposing views of what we were doing,
yeah.
all the while trying to explain to our parents, or at least me to mine, and I think John to his, like, what are you doing? What have you been doing for the last 5 or 6 years? You don't seem to publish much. I mean, what are you doing? Like, what's taking so long? So
Yeah.
we were aware of both of those possibilities, and
Yeah.
we just did it because we were doing it.
Well, this is really, I'm glad we're here because I want to dig into this a bit because I'm trying to tell the story in a way that's accessible to people who don't know
Mm,
anything about brain
right,
science and in a way. So
right,
I want to get to that. But also
sure.
I just like the fact that you were already thinking of a framework. Were you thinking of a framework for cognition, for mind, or were you thinking, okay, just for
I think it would be too far to say mind, although John
okay.
may have done that.
Well, he
John's
has all
wife.
that philosophy going on. Or you both do. I mean, the whole first part of the book is a deep dive
Yeah, but
into
John had a real background in it. I didn't. John's wife is a philosopher, got her PhD in
Eileen,
philosophy.
right? Hmm.
Eileen. So John really had serious philosophical. I read a lot, but I didn't know. I had never no actual training. Yeah. Anyway, so
But were you thinking when you were talking about it being a framework, were you thinking about for the study of the hippocampus kind of, or were you thinking because this was also a moment, I think it's so easy to forget, but as we talked about in the first conversation, it was all about memory, and that wasn't that old, right? The 50s, 60s, you were there when all of that was just right
Right,
after the
right,
Milner, the HM, and that was
right.
the establishing hippocampus as memory. So
Yeah.
you were
The
just after
framework,
that, but studying with
but
those people, and then now we have navigation coming in, so and cognitive maps and Tolman and
But what we did when one of the key moves we made away from the broader framework of hippocampus memory
mhm,
was the notion of multiple memory systems. The notion that actually the hippocampus is responsible for only one kind of memory, and other brain systems are responsible for other kinds of memory. So that's the broader framework. So we would be looking at the board and we would write hippocampus where. All right, hippocampus tells you where you are. All
mhm,
right, well, you also need a part of the brain that tells you what you're interacting with. So what's the what part of the brain? What's the why part of the brain? What's the who part of the brain? So we began to sort of think you could break down the brain into networks that we didn't talk about networks. We were not yet networky, but
mhm.
into regions which are responsible for different aspects of knowledge about the world. And somehow memory emerges from all of that. So we were not saying the hippocampus was where memories were stored. We never said that. But we were saying it's focused on, it's computationally structured to deal with the where part of what's of the world. We were not, we understood the notion of sequences, but we didn't make a lot of it in the book. I mean, we talked about it as though we meant that, but we never really said, and the hippocampus generates seed, like Bouchaki is saying. I mean, we hadn't gone that route particularly, although John was quickly onto those kinds of things in base precession, all that came out
Mhm.
about. But in the book, we hadn't yet talked much about the role of the hippocampus in generating sequences and in temporal. But we did talk about spatiotemporal. I mean, it was a bit mixed up, but the framework was a framework of if we can solve the hippocampus as the where part of the brain, then we can start to use that to leverage these other types of knowledge that the brain somehow manages to represent. And that would be a framework for thinking about how to link the brain to cognition. That we thought about, but there were a lot of pieces we didn't anticipate, and there were a lot of yeah. Anyway, I mean
Yeah.
that part of it was absolutely on our minds
Yeah, in a
as a
way it's a bit of a brainstorm, the book. I mean, you do talk a lot about space and time. I like it that it's like that way because you can see that it's not that you've decided anything for sure, but you're kind of illustrating what I think now we can see a little bit more clearly, which it's not necessarily, I mean, I didn't understand it. Maybe I'm wrong that you're saying that this part of the brain is only this or this or this, but just this idea that we don't have to have these separate categories of like one kind of like there's memory and then there's navigation and then there's this and this and this.
we didn't. I think you're right. We did not realize it at the time,
Mhm,
but we were actually weighing in on a significant debate about exactly this question of whether there are dividing lines between things like memory and perception and sensation and
mhm.
navigation and decision making. We were weighing in on that debate without realizing. We were weighing in on the side of there are no dividing lines.
And
You
you
know
were
that
showing that we could start to think of it in a different way. I think that's the hard part, right? Is because it's easier to think in these categories and maybe we needed to back then because it was all just beginning.
so then there followed from the 78, there followed 20 to 25 years of debate
Yeah.
about that issue. It sort of emerged, and it was
Hmm.
clear that our position put us on the side of the hippocampus does everything with regard to space and navigation. It's not just long-term memory or short-term memory. I mean, it's the same system. Different states of the system are involved in different aspects of so on and so. It took us a while to realize, and I then jumped in on that side of the equation. But I think that
Yeah.
was inherent in the position we took right at the beginning, that we were actually weighing in on these distinctions, these textbook distinctions, don't make much sense. We continued to use them ourselves because we had no other language. But I think the framework we were putting together was a framework that necessarily dissolved those boundaries once
Yeah.
once it
That's how I
once it
see
got
it.
fully developed.
Yeah, you couldn't. I mean, it's like you couldn't possibly see where we are right now back
No,
then, but in a way that's kind of opened the door for people to start thinking about it in that way. And one thing was this idea of the model and the map, which of course it's Tolman. We can talk about Tolman and this idea of the cognitive map, but really making like looking at that instead of looking at these categories in a way. And then I guess what I want to try to understand is how you were thinking about model and maps and so on, because of course now everything is, that's what everything is about in a way. And we're still trying to figure out, are they really in brains and all of this? But it really generated a beautiful kind of sketchbook to think about all these big issues beyond those
Yeah.
categories.
I mean, it's hard for me to actually think about how to talk about this issue because I don't think I was ever in the other place. I think, as I described to you, because I went to undergrad in Canada, I mean, I don't think I was ever in the place thinking that it wasn't like that. I mean, I just started from where Hebb started. And
Yeah.
if you take intro psych from Hebb, you assume that the brain is creating representations of stuff in the world. I mean, that's it. And I never had another view. So when that was necessarily going to be the position we took when we went to the hippocampus, because I couldn't think about the brain in any other way. And I think John was influenced a lot prior to McGill by his working with ethologists. So he was very tied into thinking about the real world. And so trying to record freely moving animals. I mean, John's career was heavily influenced by the early work he did with Danny Lehrman on ethology, on real behavior of real animals in the real world. And
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of what John did. He brought that into physiology, so to speak. So we knew from the beginning that we were both of us, because he was the same. He had worked as an ethologist. He was not in a psychology program where he was learning behaviorism when he was a master. He came to McGill kind of like a blank slate almost, with philosophy in the background,
Yeah.
and ethology, right?
Yeah.
So both of us, we never thought, well, let's see, are we saying something different here? We'd never even imagined it. We didn't know there was another. I personally can think that I don't think I understood the depth of the theoretical positions taken by the people who I was ignoring at the time, and many of them. Right, I paid no attention to Skinner or the behaviorists or any of that stuff. It was just nonsense as far as, and I think I was unfair to them at the time. But so I was totally in the representational camp already from him.
Okay.
So when we got going on this, I mean, we were obviously our notion was that there's an equivalent to something like a map in the brain. So the brain forms these internal models. I mean, it couldn't be any other way, it seemed. I mean, so again, this is straight Hebb. I don't think there's anything. We were trained in that way of thinking, and we went that way. And Tolman was the other influence, which I only just recently realized this. George Miller.
Like Brenda Milner's.
Not Brenda Milner. Miller.
Oh, okay. Miller. George Miller.
George
Okay.
Miller. 7 ± 2. That George Miller.
Oh yeah, the number that you can hold in your working memory.
Right?
Yeah.
That's George Miller, right? And George Miller wrote a book in 1960, which a lot of us read, called Plans and the Structure of Behavior. Do you know this book? Miller,
this sounds familiar. I definitely haven't read it though.
A very famous book. Miller, Galanter, and Pribram were the three authors, right? And they proposed what they called the TOTE mechanism: test, operate, test, execute. They proposed a kind of a what's the right word for it? I'm having word finding trouble these days. My age is showing itself. They proposed a model, a mechanical model, more or less, of how the brain works, and it was very much anticipated the predictive story. We'll get to that. Yeah, you could say. But they were talking about it in a way that they said that the brain creates an image. They were talking about images. So they actually were talking about what is functionally the equivalent of Tolman's cognitive map within that model. They didn't use that. So I had read that book, as did everybody. Read that book in those years, because it was like one of the few books that was really trying to do something interesting. And I suspect that might have influenced us as well. That the general framework of that which assumed that there were built-in representations, and assumed that those representations kind of influenced how you reacted in the world, and that the feedback from those how you interacted in the world then caused you to change I mean, all of that is very clearly kind of where we are right now. And the germs of that were in that book, even though its book had a, mixed fate at the time, but it certainly, I think, influenced, again, further to think about the brain as a representational device. So I don't think there was ever any chance that we would have approached this differently. I'm not sure how we ever could have having seen those place cells, having read Tolman, having been trained by Hebb, there was only one place to go. And
Yeah.
the question was how deep we were going to go into it. That was really how are we going to write a short paper on this and be done with it, or are we going to take this the whole 10 yards? And
what do you think was the deciding factor between going all the way? It just you couldn't put it down or something. I feel like you said at some point you just couldn't, there was so many interesting avenues or something.
That's the thing. It just kept on expanding, and we should add this piece, and we can't forget that piece. And it did start out, I think, as I told you, it started out, we were going to just write a paper. And I don't know what would have happened if we had ever written that paper and then gone our separate ways or something. I have no idea. I mean,
yeah, we didn't tell the story, but that you were going to write the paper, right? But then you kind of upset the editor at the psych review or something.
Well, I assumed that I had insulted the editor of psych review, so that was no longer an option. So then we decided we'll write a small monograph. In those days, it was quite common for Oxford University Press to publish small monographs, really small, 150 pages, something like that. So that's what we did, and we actually entered into a discussion with Oxford, and they thought it was a good idea. So we'll do a small monograph, and we wrote a draft of this small monograph it was in 1972, I think, when that first draft, it was either 72 or 73. And we had this draft, it was about, I think I told you, this was about 200 pages, maybe 200 to 300 pages typewritten. So it would have been 150 manual. It would have been something of that order. And did I tell you this already?
Without all the philosophy and everything.
No, this had everything. You
didn't tell me that.
This first draft had bits and pieces of everything that showed up in the book. It was already a kind of a version of the full book, although nowhere near as fleshed out, because we had already by then decided that if we're going to tell this story, we're going to have to situate it in a context that demonstrates how important it is. So we had to situate it in this broader framework of, this is a debate that's been going on in the field. This is a debate that's been going on in scholarship for thousands of years, basically.
What's that debate?
Well, how does the brain deal with the world? I mean, we had something to say about that. We thought, and we wanted to situate it in the big debate about, for example, like, where does our spatial knowledge come from? I mean, so there was this big debate about innate versus, and the debate, that's what the whole first chapter is about, is tracking this debate across time.
Right? I mean, it's almost the debate of space and time and absolute versus relative. And
that's it. It's that debate.
It's these big debates that actually go back to like the first philosophers in a way.
That's exactly right. So we wanted to situate it in that. That's why the philosophy section came first. We wanted to situate this story that we were telling. We wanted to give it the importance we thought it deserved, that it should be situated really at the nexus of this really big philosophical issue, Kant versus Leibniz.
And Newton and Einstein and everybody's in there.
And then exactly. So it was exciting. I mean,
it's still exciting, and in some weird way, it's kind of the question that spans disciplines.
It absolutely remains. The questions remain. So that was the way. So that we did this. We had this 200 to 300 page. It was 300 typewritten pages, and we made 30 copies, Xerox, 30 copies, and we sent them to people around the world. We sent them to everybody we thought could give us some useful feedback, unsolicited. Half of them were people we didn't know, people in philosophy or linguistics, because they were parts of this thing, that, etc. We sent this unbidden out, and we talked long about the risk we were taking.
Yeah, I think that's why it's so successful in a way, is because it's looking at the problems, it's talking about the problems. It's not necessarily saying here's all the answers, but it's like showing there's different ways to explore it, which for me becomes a bit the framework that we're trying to embrace, this interdisciplinary idea of neuroscience, cognitive science. I mean, in a way, that's kind of the the start
That's
that I'm
kind of,
talking about. It's
yeah.
bringing in
Well,
all
that's
that
great.
stuff that
And I think,
now that's what you study. You study all that stuff.
right, exactly right. And I think that's kind of where we were coming from, basically.
Yeah. But I do wonder if you thought about if memory and navigation needed to fit together somehow because of this one area of the brain and all these different studies that,
No, I mean,
you
we
know,
didn't. I mean, and I
okay.
still don't. I mean, I think the field as a whole, and me certainly too, is still struggling with this contingent fact that navigation and memory are wrapped up together in the brain. It's a fact, we know it. But
Yeah.
why? Why did it have to be that way, or did this just, I mean, why do we have two eyes in the front of our head rather? I mean, there's all kinds of things that happened. They didn't have to happen, but they did, and that determined what came next in evolution. So why are these two things kind of so wrapped up together? And that remains a challenging question.
Yeah, but
And
I do think that for me, that's part of the importance of all this too, is because, and I'm not sure you will agree with this, you might actually disagree, but for me, we're starting to see that those aren't really different things, but it's different ways of looking at this process,
that's
that
part
you
of
can
it.
use the same model to look at
That's part of
the
it.
process from different angles, which is really
This
hard to get it, understand
dissolving these lines, these
all those
is
categories.
it has that effect. Exactly
Yeah.
right.
I think we're still figuring out how to do that, and maybe it takes some new technology and maths and so on. But that for
My,
me is the exciting thing, is opening up to, it's not about calling one category memory and one navigation, but what are
right.
we trying to figure out? And then we might see different patterns in the
Again, yes,
same area.
that's true. But it's important to remember that the kind of memory we're talking about is a specific kind of memory, right? So it's not that navigation is entwined with all forms of memory. It's entwined with a brain region that is critical for a particular kind of memory, right? And other parts of the brain are not connected to navigation in that way. So it's
Right.
not that memory and navigation writ large are totally intertwined. It's that there's an aspect of navigation and an aspect of, it's a Venn diagram issue.
Hmm.
There's aspects of navigation and aspects of memory that over what we call memory that overlap. Right. And what I've been thinking, and I don't think we ever said anything like this in the book, is that it has to do with, and we didn't really address the evolutionary issues in the book. I've written about these
You've written
subsequent,
about development. I wanted to ask you about that. So,
but this is phylogenetic development. The arguments that I make now is that the evidence now showing that the hippocampal mapping system can be used for non-spatial things
mhm.
is part of the debate. Is this really a spatial system or not? Whatever. So the argument I like to make now is that evolutionarily, it started out as a purely spatial system. That what drove the evolution of this system was the need to effectively find your way around in space. I mean, which
Yeah.
all terrestrial animals, not just terrestrial animals, all animals that move. If they move, they've got to figure their way around in space, unless they're one-celled organisms that just drift with the water. I mean, there are kinds of animals that don't need to
Even
do it.
then, they're still making their way. It's
They're
just
making their
they
way according to
not in a
tropism,
different way.
and smell, and things like that, right?
Hmm.
So the idea is that it, life on this planet presented finding your way in the world from an evolutionary perspective as a key problem that had to be solved in order to find food, in order to find mates, in order to find safety. All these
Hmm.
ways, everything requires being able to move effectively in space.
Yeah, in
So
a way, that is life, right? It's day one, you're figuring it
exactly
out.
right.
There's no
So
choice.
so the argument is that it started as a purely spatial system, but in order to do the job that it had to do to map space in some reasonably detailed way, so you could actually find your way around in the world, it had to be focused on details. It had to actually be focused on details. Now, if you put together a system that is basically noticing all the details in the world and sort of mapping them, if you will, or onto some sort of a scaffold that enables you to work out the spatial relations amongst them,
Hmm.
if you do that for a purely spatial purpose, you end up with a memory. You end up with a memory of the details that existed in that space.
Yeah.
So the argument goes, starts as a spatial system, needs to deal with details in order to function effectively as a spatial system, having evolved into computationally a system that can do that with details, this indexing mode of hippocampus,
Mm-hmm.
suddenly it's a memory. This is great. Now we can use this as a memory, right? As a memory for the place that I was in, context memory, as a memory for where something is located. We can use it for memory. And then it expands in that way. And this device, this kind of relatively flexible computational device that can take details and map them into a continuous manifold, which is really what a cognitive map is,
Mm-hmm.
can be used for things that are not spatial. Once, with enough jiggering in evolution, you might be able to map something else onto this system, like language, that can fit, so on and so on and so on. So that was kind of where we were. That was what we were thinking.
Yeah, I mean, that would be kind of how I would propose it too, in a way, is that
I mean, John and I
it
talked
starts
about,
with that system of that you
yeah,
described, but even what we call spatial can change a little bit depending on where you're measuring it
yeah,
from
that's
when it
true.
comes to something like a
Yeah,
language or an image representation.
yeah. Space is by no means an unequivocally simple thing.
No,
Space
no.
is just as complicated as memory, right? So
But
that would be,
this same the same process that you're describing can actually kind of scale and nest at different levels. And it even doesn't even have to be only the hippocampus, but I mean,
no, it
there
isn't.
there's something about the process that you're describing that.
Yes. Yeah. Anyway, so that was the framework. Now, the other piece of the framework, so the bigger, broader framework was that we think we can break the brain down into these systems if we think about them the right way. And the right way to think about them is the kind of knowledge that they convey to the organism, spatial knowledge, value knowledge, the amygdala, you
Mm-hmm.
know, et cetera. You can see where this is going.
Yep.
Well, then what next? Well, then the other piece of the puzzle that you've pointed out was that we bought in right away. Again, we didn't think about it as like there's an alternative here. We bought in immediately to the idea that if you have such a thing, you can use it to make predictions. You basically use it to behave. You use it when you come to a choice point. You consult your map and it tells you, if I turn left, I'm going to get this. I have
Mm-hmm.
left-right problems. If you turn left, you're going to get this. If you turn right, you're going to get that. That was essential. That was essential to the model, right? And so we said
Right.
that. That's
So
one
this
of
whole
the things
idea of active inference, minimizing surprise, prediction
that
error,
was
all
all
these
in
kind
there,
of,
even though we didn't use any of those words.
no, those words aren't there at all, but
We were
there's a
totally devoid.
similar idea that's going on. You have some kind of, yeah, you have some kind of model, you would have called it, right? Or map
Right.
with which you're, I guess you don't, all, prediction is the word we could use now, but in a way, that's how you're moving in through the world in the way you described. Like
Yeah.
the
And you're
more,
constantly,
so you move through the world, you notice patterns in the world, you align or fit to those patterns, whatever. And literally your brain is doing that. And that is your kind of model, which you then use to minimize
there.
whatever might harm you.
Exactly right. So the framework we were creating, where we bought into Tolman's idea that what you learn about are the expectations. You
Mm-hmm.
learn about this leads to that, right? And you act on the base. Tolman had it too. I mean, this is we're not new to us. So we bought into that completely, and then we said right off the bat, one of the key things the map does is it makes predictions. And that we did say. We said predictions. We did use that word there. We didn't say the brain is a predictive device, and we didn't say all that
Yeah.
activity. None of that. But it's all implicit in the
Mm-hmm.
frame that we were creating. I think
Well, I think
with
that's a strength for everyone, right? When you, in the same way you were just describing Miller, it's
yeah,
similar to Tolman, which is similar to Hebb. They're different ways of trying to describe something that people are obviously seeing and have the technology to somehow try to point out. So I feel like in a way, the cognitive mapping and the predictive processing, you're in two different references and two different kind of ways of coming at it, but aren't we sort of trying to basically understand how some sort of body with a nervous system processes its encounter in a way to survive? I mean,
absolutely. That's
yeah.
the key right there. That's the whole story. But of course, that turns out to be not so simple.
Well, it's so rich and it's always
that's,
changing.
that's the problem.
And weirdly, in the way you describe, the more we learn about it, the more it changes because it's all like one process. Yeah. But I do wonder like how you really think about representations and models and so on. Tolman already there was this connection with knowledge and navigation and it's all already in all the stuff, but when you study it, sometimes we still try to separate everything and say there is like a static representation in the brain. And Are you saying that, or is it more patterns based than parts
Oh,
based?
it is patterns. I mean, wow. I mean, that's a tough one. These are the tough issues that you're
These are
grappling.
tough, but it's the kind of stuff that people need to talk about more.
Absolutely, absolutely. Here's what I'm current. I mean, this really speaks to the question of what do you think a memory is,
Yeah.
among other things. You could say, what do you think a representation is? But let's talk about it in terms of
Or
a
even a
memory.
trace, because it ends up with your multiple trace. Like people still can go around the
Absolutely, no, no,
same
absolutely.
theory.
So
Yeah. Or the same issue.
something changes in the brain as a function of our experience.
Yeah.
Everyone accepts that, right?
Hmm. I mean, we've
Brain,
seen that in the studies for sure.
we know that things change. Okay. Whatever that change is as a function of a specific experience that I have, that the changes that occur in the brain that reflect that experience, we can call that a representation of that experience. Let's just do that for the moment. Now the question becomes, is that representation explicit in the way you're describing? Is it a
Mm.
static pattern that you could point to? If you just knew what to look for, you could say, aha, the activity of these 7D2000 neurons, that means I'm thinking about a bird. I
Yeah.
got versus the idea that we don't actually have. I chose a bad example. Let's take an example of, again, of a memory. So I have a sort of a memory for what I did yesterday. Whatever happened in my brain, changes that
Hmm.
occurred today that stored information about what I did yesterday. So the question is whether they are stored literally as a kind of a memory, the way a recording is stored, or whether they are stored in some other form, and then the information that is gained during that experience is somehow put together when you are recalling it. Is memory always a constructive act of putting some things together, or is there some actual template that is the memory, and all you have to do is ping it, basically?
Like we could go lift it out of the brain or something rather
Exactly
than,
right. Now
yeah.
I'm veering in the other direction now. I think up to recently, people were of the view that, yeah, there are memories and you could find them, right?
Hmm.
You can, and they are permanent, and we know that, blah, blah. You can change them and then reconsolidate. Then all of a sudden, the dynamics of memory began to emerge. Reconsolidation, a whole bunch of other things began to emerge. The sort of the dissolution of the line between perception and memory, the idea
Hmm.
that all of that stuff conspires
And
to
all
make.
that stuff that's in the book that got
Yeah,
richer
all
too.
that is kind of in the book or hinted at in the book. And then you
Hmm.
saw, well, does it make any sense to talk about memory that way anymore? Kind of the way the sort of medial temporal lobe memory system framework talked about memory, that you have memories and they're stored in this system,
Yeah, I
right?
think you're already, in a way, what you're saying is we don't have to talk about it that way anymore. I'm not sure it was ever that way, but that's why I bring it back to the book, because it's similar to those categories and stuff. You need them up to a point. You need to
Yeah,
believe them as real,
sure.
somehow, like that you can pick them out of the brain. But we
I
maybe just don't need to believe that anymore. I don't think it
agree.
actually changes the research that was done. It just
I don't
changes the
think it
way
does.
we talk about it.
Absolutely. I believe that's true. But for a while, I mean, the field of memory, at least, was dominated by the debate between those two positions, right?
Yeah, and
And
I really understand it because you want to hold tight to that. And I just think it's more that we can't handle how to understand that it might not be there in some
totally
static way. It doesn't mean it's not there. It's just more that a million things could be there depending on,
that's the
again,
problem.
what encounter are you in?
But when you think about, I mean, we're trying to work on these questions of what is actually there, and and
Yeah.
how how stable is it? I mean, what we know is that most of these things are not very stable. I mean, the
Yeah.
whole of a so everything's up for grabs there. But my position is close to what my current position is very much what you're hinting at now, which is we don't need to talk about these things that way anymore. Now, I prefer, I published a paper back in '08, I think, which you may or may not have seen. It was called Update on Memory Systems, where I
Yeah.
said we
I
should
think
throw the
so.
word away and we should just use, the idea
It's
that we
yeah.
acquire knowledge of various kinds and different systems are responsible for acquisition of different kinds of knowledge. And then when we retrieve a memory, we just access all the knowledge we have and put together that memory.
Yeah, it's good
That's
you bring up that it actually has these real consequences. I mean, because we can get lost in trying to describe it, but actually it really matters in terms of if we want to help people who have some issue with memory or
how these,
something,
yeah,
or so
they're
it's
organized.
not, yeah, like it matters the language we use, but what we really want to try to figure out, and what you're trying to figure out in your work, is how do you like figure out when and how those traces, or whatever we want to call them, representations, are activated. Not that they need to be stored somewhere, but it's like, how do you, when something goes wrong, what's going wrong?
Yeah, well, that's
Yeah.
kind of what I'm interested in now.
Mm.
And that's the prediction error story. When something goes wrong, when your memory leads you astray, you make a prediction that doesn't get confirmed, your memory no longer holds for the current situation. That's where the adaptive story begins. I mean, what happens now? How is the system structured such that it can take this faulty prediction
Mm-hmm.
and benefit from it? What happens now? Right. So you got to go back and you got to figure out, where did the prediction come from in my brain, and how can I change that information in a way that in the future, I can behave appropriately. And so all those dynamics that now
Yeah.
come into play. Yeah,
I think
kind of
that's important too, is that same notion of why it's important to write books about this and to collaborate. Your career has been a big collaboration, and because a lot of it is this figuring out the story. It's the more that I mean, this word trace is kind of loaded now that I talked about trace there, but the more that we can sort of trace this development of how we understand all this research, because even our understanding of the research begins to change, the better maybe we can start to kind of model and understand how to do that, right? Like even just looking at that book and being able to read that book and all the papers too. It's one reason papers are still important. You can start to see patterns, right, that have held. And if you can reinterpret them in the way that you're doing now, you never know. It might be something very simple that suddenly can help us understand how to keep better health in terms of whatever
what
is
we're
going.
all hoping for, that kind of little insight, that holy grail that it'll all crystallize and it'll all look so simple. Oh, right. It's
I'm sure it will at some point. That's how it
no.
goes.
To me, that's the scientific enterprise. And that indeed, the way the book got, I mean, that's in fact a metaphor for how aspects of the book got put together.
Yeah, the book is a bit of an example of that.
But take an area, say, okay, let's say we want to say something about development, right? So I just then went and read everything that had ever been written about development of the hippocampus. That was my job, right? In those sections of the book, which were all of the behavioral lesion sections, I just read everything, and it was pieces floating around everywhere, and just around, and then suddenly they crystallize.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly, what you just described happens. That you begin to see a pattern in all of that allows you to simplify it, and you rotate stuff, and suddenly everything's lined up, and you actually have a story that makes very few assumptions, very few free parameters, but it actually accounts for a lot of the story. That process that I just described in 30 seconds replayed itself over and over and over again throughout the whole book. All the sections that I don't know how John approached writing the physiology. He probably had something similar, but in writing all of the sections that I was primarily the first drafter of, that was the process. Do exactly what you're saying. Look,
and in a way, weirdly, this is kind of a good example of what we're trying to figure out, because you were able to do that then, because I remember you telling me you kind of went back and bought all the books that or as many as you could.
Yeah, there they are.
Yeah, they're there with you. Yeah.
There's one bookshelf right there. There's about 25 books.
Right, which is amazing. I mean, if you tried to do it today, like you need new technology and new ways of processing it in a way, but it's the patterns that are the same in a way. You're still looking for patterns in the same way, and the more deeply you go, because you went very deeply at that time, the more they crystallize. It's just we're trying to figure out how do we process so much more information in a deep way.
That is a significant problem for students now. You know, I mean, I don't envy the job that you and younger scientists have, other younger scientists, and trying to sort of distill the patterns, because the data set is so much more enormous than it was before. So it's tough, but I think if you were there, we also
have so much more technology, and
I mean, all of that is true, but at every stage, I think the people who are living their scientific experiences at that particular moment in time, they can think there's all way more complex, but
You
you
always
go
feel
back 100
overwhelmed.
years, you probably find lots of overwhelming information.
But
A
did you
lot of it
feel
unreliable.
overwhelmed? Did you feel like that when you were trying to read all those books? Or did you think, oh, this is manageable?
It was manageable.
Yeah,
It was manageable at the
you
time
felt it.
because this was early 70s.
Yeah,
There
you were
may have been
beginning all of this.
couple thousand. I mean, there really wasn't that much. I mean, there was a lot, but there wasn't. So that I read whatever I could read in other languages. I got translations. I mean, we went into we
Wow,
tried to track down everything that had been published on the
it's a very
hippocampus
exciting
as of 19,
time.
and try to distill the patterns from that. But now there's a piece missing here, which is if you do that and you start with no hypothesis whatsoever or no framework, it's basically needle in a haystack time. You have to go to the very first step of looking at this massive array of stuff. You have to have some organizing principle in your head.
That's a really important point because you already, as you said, had this. You took for granted that
we had a framework. We had a framework and an orientation that basically pushed us in a certain direction that facilitated crystallization of a certain sort. I mean, without that, you could be basically moving around the space of this problem, so to speak, forever. And we sort of made that point. I mean, John made that point about the units. He said, if you may have read that somewhere, look, if you approach this thing like you're going in a given experiment, you're going to explore one variable, right? You're just going to confine the animal. You're going to really restrict this environment. You're going to explore one variable. Really? Do you really think you're going to find the right one out of the 14,000 that you might have manipulated in that experiment? You have to have some idea what are the right variables? What are the things that are likely to tickle this brain structure? You have to have some idea to start with. And we did. So we had an idea. And with that idea, one could look at this literature and say, can that idea help us crystallize this mess, this steaming mess of data? And what you see in the book is the result of it. Our attempts to sort of make sense out of this rather inchoate literature, all within the same framework.
Has your we have to go soon, so I just wondered if your views of like behavior and cognition have changed at all. In the beginning, you were just, I mean, do you really think of them as separate, or do you see it all as
behavior and cognition?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't even know how to define cognition. I mean, that's my first problem. I try to stay away from it. I mean, and whenever I ask even very serious psychologists, can you give me a definition of cognition that does two things? One, it cleanly separates things that are cognitive from things that are not cognitive. The definition allows me to do that. And two, it lets me ask the question, do other animals and plants have this? Right?
Right.
I have yet to find a person who could come up with a definition that satisfied any of those.
Well, I have a definition, and I think it's actually one you just gave, and I think it's if it's a body making its way through an encounter, that's a cognitive for me. I mean, in a way, I think that's what I'm trying to get at. I feel like you guys sort of started this way of looking at what is cognitive as a particular kind of act, which layers, of course. I mean, a plant making its way is a completely different thing than a human who has learned representations and language and so forth.
But plants have memory. I mean, a lot of the things that we assume reflect cognition. If you look at definitions and textbooks,
right, and that's why I think that definition works for a plant. You don't say that it has human memory because it doesn't have a human body, it doesn't have a human nervous system, but it's still going to have memory for it.
Yeah. But the typical human in the street says the word memory. They don't think about what a plant is doing.
And that's the problem. That's the problem, because if you say a plant has memory, they think you mean human memory. And that's the problem with how we've defined cognition. But I think stuff like your book opens up.
The book opens it up, and we certainly use the term, but I honestly don't know a very sharp definition of cognition that allows me to say this is not cognition. So I don't spend my time doing that, I guess. I like representations, on the other hand. I wrote a chapter. Did you read that? Did I send you that chapter on the neurobiology of representation?
No, but I would love to read it.
This was 1984, so it's pretty out of date.
Oh, wow.
And it was a book that came out of a conference that was held here in Arizona. It was actually the conference that I gave a talk in that led to me getting hired here. So it was,
Oh.
played a role in my career. I'll send you that chapter, but again, bear in mind that it's very simplistic, and because it was before, it was just at the cusp of the connectionist revolution.
Oh yeah,
Connectionism
I
was
would definitely want
just
to read that.
so it was anyway. I'll send you that. You can
Are
download it.
Yeah, well, just please send it to me, or at least send me the
That's
name of
it.
it.
Let me
We only have four
okay.
minutes left, but I want to ask you because you've been doing all this hippocampal history stuff. When we saw each other in Arizona, you were thinking about maybe still putting it in a book. Are you still thinking about that, or are you just gonna?
I think that's over with. Let me
Okay,
send history. Send the represent.
your Mastodon stuff, your hippocampus. I
Oh,
mean,
that stuff. Yeah.
I don't do
No, no.
much social media.
The book is that's not going to happen. So what the new development in that sphere is that Mike Castlemore, who's the editor of Hippocampus, the journal Hippocampus, is asked me to join him in helping to put together a, a special issue of the journal. And nowadays, a special issue means more than just one issue. It's whatever.
Yeah, yeah,
A
it can be
theme
many parts.
on the history of work on Hippocampus. And
Okay, cool.
he's invited about 20 or 30 people to write somewhat a little bit different in response to somewhat different questions than the one that I was posing to people, but nonetheless. And I'm joining him with that. A lot of people are. So there's going to be a kind of a series of articles coming out in the Journal of Hippocampus over the next year or two,
Okay.
where people tell their personal story about how they discovered what they discovered or how they did what they did or so on.
Oh, that's great.
That's the latest move on the history front. I've given up the idea of writing a book because I couldn't figure out how to do it that I was happy with. So I'm happy just to get this history out there. But
Mhm.
that's where it's at.
I just want to make sure because I know you were asking people all these really interesting questions and stuff, and first of all, I want to be able to cite it, like if
Yeah,
when I'm writing the book.
you
So I
can.
wanted to know, are you going to compile it somewhere other than,
Now, I don't
is
think I
it
have any intention at the moment of doing anything more with it than what I've done with it. I mean,
okay?
I've put it out, I've put everything out there for the use of the public. It's all out there on Mastodon, which is not necessarily accessible to everybody, but it's out there, so it's public, and people
Okay.
can do whatever they want.
And what
If you
about,
want
didn't you
to
do some
use it, or
interviews with Brenda Milner and stuff like that? Are you going to put those somewhere?
I that one's on Mastodon now as well. I broke it up
Oh, it is? Oh,
into
okay,
multiple.
great. Mhm.
Go back
Cool.
to Mastodon. I added the Brenda Milner. I added the Moser interviews and the Brenda Milner interview.
Okay.
So recently,
All
not
right,
well,
great.
maybe a month ago or two. Yeah,
That's really good.
I don't
Here's
feel like we got to a lot of stuff, Bill.
We
Yeah, I
didn't we
know
didn't even
it's.
talk about Arizona. We didn't talk about the McNaughtons. We didn't talk about anything, but we at least talked about interesting stuff relative to the brain because that is what I'm in a way trying to figure out how to
So
put
where are
that
you?
time period
What
in.
you're doing?
I'm working on different levels, right? So as a philosopher, I'm trying to find a way to really define
Yeah,
what cognition is. And I feel like it's
right.
already there. So I'm kind of looking at stuff that you've done, but also in biology and a lot of different places and
Uh,
trying to say what's the pattern and the framework that everyone's already
yeah.
pointing out. But I'm also, as I told you, I just want to tell the story because I think these ideas can be very helpful for everyday readers if it's told, the story of the hippocampus is told in a accessible way. And it's also, you're all just great characters. It's interesting. So I'm also writing that.
Yeah. So what's your timeline?
I already have the first draft of the seahorse one, the book, but there's just so much that I still wanna. There's just so many interesting people.
There are.
Yeah,
You know,
there's just so much. It's like that's why, as you know, you could just go on and on telling the story of the seahorse, the hippocampus.
yeah. Have you talked to John? I doubt it because John is
I haven't even
secretive.
tried. I talked to him in Arizona, but I didn't even tell him I
Yeah,
was
but
writing the book.
you'd be hard pressed to get John to pay attention to you over email. I mean, or to give it. No harm in trying, but I doubt. I don't think
I
that'd be
haven't tried
successful.
yet. I would
But
love to talk to him.
you
I really want to hear about
you
his
might
philosophical years and like I actually
have
want to ask him
you know
about Eileen and if they talked about it and
why don't you send him an email and say these are the things you're interested in. You're writing a book on the history of this, and these are the things you're interested in. And would he be willing to spend some time to tell you the truth?
yeah,
I mean,
maybe I will.
and
So
you can say you've talked with me, and he could check back with me. He might check back with me and say, "Is this person legit or whatever?"
okay. Yeah,
You
I will
know,
then.
there's no harm. I don't think you have any harm in trying. And
No,
if you're going
okay.
to write the story, it'd be a good idea to try.
Yeah.
Another person I think you should think about talking to, if you haven't done already, is Yuri Busaki.
I have talked to
Uh,
him. I went and visited him at his office and stuff, so we've hung out some.
Good.
Yeah.
Yes, Yuri is
He's
Yuri.
good. He's really interested in the philosophy side too, so that
What I'm thinking. Yuri, good. I'm
yeah.
glad you've made that contact. I
Yeah.
encourage what you're doing. If I can help in any further way, let me know. I'll send you that chapter. I'll send you that the representation chapter now
Okay.
when I get off.
And if anything comes to mind that you think, hey, this is this about you or about anyone that you think this is really important and it should be in a story about the
I don't know.
about,
I think it would help me if
let
I
me
saw
know.
what you were including. I mean, if I saw what you were including, then I might say, oh, there's a missing piece here. But
Oh, well,
just
I'll
to
send you a
sort of say,
draft of it before
yeah,
it's
I mean,
published.
it
If you
just
want to
helps
read
me to
it for
think
you.
of,
Yeah, yeah.
well, I will at some point.
If you
Yeah,
don't mind reading
you know,
yourself as a character. But I think you'll like it actually.
I
It's
can
all
always hope,
very
right?
positive. It's a positive thing.
You might want to talk to Sharon Ranganath also, by the way. He's just coming out with a book now on memory. He's gotten a lot of press in the last week.
Oh, really?
He did a
Yeah, he was at my
he
lab,
did a
so
he
I
did
didn't
a
know he had a
Terry
book
Gross
coming out.
interview. Oh,
Oh,
it just
really?
came out 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
on remember
Gosh, I
something like
didn't know.
Why Do We Remember? Whatever it is, Ranganath just came out within the last few weeks. He's been doing interviews. He's going to go over to the UK apparently. I mean,
Cool.
it's a for the public kind of book about memory
That's
and
very good.
remembering and forgetting. And
Okay.
so Sharon is, yeah, somebody you probably want to pay attention
Yeah,
to.
that's good. I just haven't been paying attention to popular culture in the past couple of months, so I'll have to look at that. Thanks for telling me.
Yeah.
All
All
right.
right.
Well,
Well,
it's been great to talk to you,
stay in
and I
touch.
appreciate it. And I'll be in touch
Good luck.
again. Thank
And
you.
you're still in Amsterdam
In Utrecht. Yeah. Utrecht.
and Utrecht.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've
So
been in Utrecht. Yeah. Nice.
that's where we live.
Good. Enjoy.
All right. Be well. Thank you so much, Lynn.
Bye bye.
Bye. Thanks for everything.